Welcome to our webinar. My name is Jo and I am the Wellbeing Services Manager here at British Safety Council. I've been working in the wellbeing sphere for over 10 years and I'm really passionate about helping people feel their best so that they can reach their full potential both inside and outside of work. Through our overall wellbeing service provision and consultative work at British Safety Council, I spend a lot of my time guiding organisations in taking a strategic approach to wellbeing so that they can provide the best support for their people and meet their business objectives. And I'm joined by my colleague Marcus. With over 15 years of experience and 2 degrees in the wellbeing industry, Marcus has worked with organisations from micro to global on their approach to organisational wellbeing and how to develop an effective and meaningful wellbeing strategy. Marcus has worked with business leaders and elite athletes on enhancing their personal well-being and reducing their risk of lifestyle diseases through effective behaviour change strategies. So, what's the plan for the next 45 minutes? Well, I'm going to take you on a little journey to talk to you about well-being strategies and how it relates to roadworks. Then Marcus is going to talk to you more about what well-being is and common barriers we've seen firsthand over the years. And then we're going to be talking about how the Workplace Wellbeing Programme has been helping organisations to create and implement a wellbeing strategy over the last few years. We're going to round up the webinar by asking you to kindly complete a little feedback form so that we know what we're doing well or not, as the case may be, and what you want to hear more about in the future from us. And then finally, we're going to finish with some Q&A. And if at any point throughout the presentation you want to ask us a question, pop it into the question box and we'll try and cover it at the end. Full disclosure, we might not get through all of the questions, however, we'll try our best to get through as many as possible. This webinar will be recorded, so if you want to see the slides and all the content, again, then feel free to access the recording, which will be on YouTube by the end of the week. So as well as the opportunity to ask questions throughout, which we'll cover at the end, there will be moments during this webinar that will ask you to participate. So get your phones and fingers ready. So without further ado, we'll get cracking. Do you remember a few years ago when we all used to use maps to get to A to B? So I'm going to ask you to take a picture of the QR code or join at slido.com, and I would love to know how many of you have used a real, in inverted commas, map in the last few years. Have you used one within the last year? Have you used one in 1 to 5 years ago, 5+ years ago, or I've never used a real map? There is no judgment. I'm just curious to find out whether you've used a real map. I'll just give you 10 more seconds to answer and then we'll carry on. All right, thank you for that. So some people, the least amount have used it within the last year, and then 1 to 5 years ago, 28%, 5+ years ago, 31%, and 22% of us here have never used a real map. So for those, did I say 22%? I have to double check. For those 22% of people that haven't used a map, then bear with me. For those, if my maths is right, 78% of us that have, you'll remember that we'd get our map out and then we'd locate our start and destination point. We'd plan the route based on where we wanted to go, time, distance, road type. We'd consider all the possible obstacles that might get in our way. Maybe there was a big football match planned with lots of traffic slowing us down, with our roadworks on an A road, or we're likely to get stuck behind tractors on a B road. Where were the potential petrol stations en route so that we could get petrol? On our journey, we might have the radio on that would alert us to traffic jams or accidents. And maybe we'd have a passenger by the side of us with the map open on their lap to follow their route. And maybe they'd be prepared with a torch so that we could see the map in the dark. But we don't really do that anymore, do we? Well, most of us don't, or some of us haven't ever. We put the address in our sat-nav and we trust it to take us to the right place. It tells us how to get there how long it will take, whether we need to reroute, where the petrol stations are, speed cameras, traffic jams. It's a really quick, easy and reliable fix to navigation struggles. So much that most of us, as we can see from our little Slido earlier, just simply type the address in and leave the rest to our mini computers. Really quick, easy and reliable to help us with navigation struggles. So that most of us just use this. And while sat-navs have given us back some time, some energy, perhaps some reassurance that we get from A to B with more ease, unfortunately, workplace wellbeing isn't quite that simple. It's not a quick fix. There's no real easy solution, and we can't really leave it to mini computers to tell us everything we need. Why? Well, because your organisation is unique and your people are unique. Whilst a weekly exercise class, yoga, the latest app, and fitness challenge, they're good in and of themselves, they're not and will be the quick fix that you might be after that will holistically support the well-being of your employees, engage them, and boost productivity. So you might be here today because you want to support the health and well-being of your employees. Maybe you want to boost engagement, or maybe you want to improve mental health, stress, workload. Or it might just be because you've heard so much good stuff about our Workplace Wellbeing Programme, you're keen to know how it can support your organisation. When we look at workplace wellbeing, we need to take an approach more akin to how we used to use maps. Not because we want to make it harder for ourselves, but because when it comes to truly supporting the well-being of our employees, there isn't a little tiny computer that does it for us. We need to look at our starting point and where we want to go, what obstacles might get in our way, and how we might mitigate them. We might even need a little more than a torch. Then, when we've got that information, we can put together a well-being strategy that will make a real difference to our people. So actually, when I put it like that, it does sound pretty easy, doesn't it? So I'm going to hand over to Marcus, and he's going to talk you through what well-being actually is.
Thank you, Joe. So the same as everybody used the Slido function in order to complete the previous survey, if you could do the same thing and just answer the question, either in your own words or a definition that you use, one that you've read before. What do you think well-being is? Okay, we've got some familiar words coming through when looking at the definition of well-being. Balance is coming up as a bit of a theme there. Okay, I'll give a few more seconds just for people to submit the words that they would describe well-being as. Okay, so let's go with what we can see on screen at the moment. It's fine if you're still submitting your views. So one of the reasons why we ask this question is because we're talking about the Workplace Wellbeing Programme. And ideally, in order for us to understand how to improve well-being within the workplace, we need to have a collective definition that we all refer to. We also need to use the word well-being almost as an anchor point for whenever we put together any kind of case for investing time, resources, and money into well-being in the workplace. And so I'll share with you in a moment how we define well-being within British Safety Council, some of the complexity attached to that definition, and then also actually how we refer to well-being from a workplace perspective, which then underpins our approach to the Workplace Wellbeing Programme. So you can see here some of the words that have come up. Health and balance are the two most popular. We've got happiness, we've got physical and mental coming into there as well, a balance of life and circumstances. And so you can see that even with just asking what one word means, you can see the variety in the descriptions that people use for that particular word. Now, we describe it within British Safety Council as an individual's ongoing ability that enables them to thrive. And whilst philosophically, I do believe that that is completely accurate, I do believe that that's a good description of the word well-being. It shows that well-being is a transient thing. It's not something that you get and then you suddenly have. It's something that takes consistent and regular input. It can go up and it can go down, and it can change within a week, it can change within a day. So because of the complexity attached to the word well-being, that's part of the reason why at the moment there isn't necessarily a map that exists that can guide organizations through developing a well-being strategy, although maybe that's something that we can actually help with. So the way that we now look at well-being from a workplace perspective, if we move on to the next screen, please, Joe, you will see the domains of well-being which have been described by the CIPD. And what you'll notice, if you haven't seen the domains of well-being before, you'll notice there's some of the key words that were described in other people's definitions of well-being on the previous slide. You can see them featuring within these domains. And also, if you haven't seen these before, it's likely that there'll be some descriptive words that you haven't previously connected with well-being when it comes to the workplace. So if we take the health domain to start off with, you can see that mental health and physical health were both defined in other people's description of what well-being is on the previous slide. Well, of course, we're British Safety Council. We've been helping organisations with health and safety over the last 67 years. And so physical safety is also part of the health domain. If somebody doesn't feel physically safe in their working environment, that will likely have an impact on their mental health and therefore have an impact on their well-being. If we move across our focus then from health into the good work domain, you can see that things like, of course, yes, the working environment, similar to physical safety, but you can also see things like good line management has an impact on somebody's well-being. And now, of course, that makes sense because management style is the second most common cause of stress within the workplace. And naturally, if you have something that causes stress, that then has an impact on somebody's overall well-being. Coming across to the values and principles, you, of course, have inclusion and diversity as another subsection within that. The same thing applies there, that if you're working in an environment that you don't feel like you're being accepted for who you are and where you come from, and naturally that will have an impact on somebody's inherent well-being. We come down to the collective and social section. Naturally, how good your relationships are within the workplace will have an impact, but also whether or not the employee voice is actually captured and listened to. We'll be touching on the employee voice a little bit later on in the presentation as well, in terms of how we can help to support that. Moving along to personal growth, again, learning new things or having a career development pathway in order to follow are things that have been found to improve somebody's subjective well-being. And then across to good lifestyle choices. More often than not, when we ask people what the word well-being means, they'll usually provide a combination of the health domain and the good lifestyle choices domain. We know that how physically active we are and how well we eat will, of course, have an impact on our overarching well-being. And then something that's been certainly more prominent over the last 2 years, just simply because of the various cost of living crises around the world and also the conflict, financial well-being has definitely grown in interest and need. And of course, financial well-being is not simply how much somebody gets paid, but it's also their relationship with the money that they receive and their understanding of debt management and retirement planning. And so when we're looking at workplace well-being, we're factoring all of these different domains and subsections within that conversation. And it could be that when somebody's setting up their well-being plans for the future, actually, rather than trying to touch on every one of these domains, they might need to just focus on one domain and maybe even one subsection. So with that in mind, let's now have a look at how organizations are currently approaching well-being within the workplace. Joe mentioned that between us, there's 25 years of experience working with well-being. So I think we're in a pretty good position to be able to share with you what we see most commonly happening within organizations when we first start working with them. If you imagine this pyramid representing the amount of time that an organization spends in these subsections, you'll see that the most amount of time and effort is spent on the tertiary. Now, tertiary is a reactive approach to a well-being need, and it's more focused on interventions and providing things to employees rather than addressing secondary or primary. And what we tend to find is that most organizations, with the best intentions, are providing tertiary benefits because they believe that that's going to be a benefit to their employees, but it might not be exactly what the employees need, and it might not be something the employees will actually engage with. So it's not through ill intention, it's just through not being informed by the need. Then less time then is spent on secondary, which is where you take a risk management approach. You identify what's happening at the moment, what mitigations you have in place, and whether or not you can introduce further control measures. And of course, that is more beneficial than tertiary because it's being led by data. But ideally, well, at the moment, what we're seeing is less time being spent in the top of that pyramid on the primary approach to wellbeing in the workplace. And ideally, what we would like to see is, if we transition to the next image, what we'd like to see, and where more benefit actually comes about when it comes to workplace wellbeing, is more time being spent on the primary wellbeing promotion approach, still some time being spent on secondary, but less so than primary, and then third focus being on the tertiary. So we're actually addressing the source, and then we're needed preventing at an employee level, then focusing on what the treatment might be needed or what intervention might be needed based on the remaining risk. Unfortunately, we don't see that as commonplace. We do see it, but it's few and far between. And it's usually with organizations that take a very specific approach, which we'll be sharing in a moment. So Joe, if we can move on to the next slide. So we're talking about the Workplace Wellbeing Programme here that we provide from British Safety Council. And we've spoken already that where we have a strategy in place, where we have an actual objective that we need to achieve, we're more likely to, as Joe was saying, follow the map and get to our end destination. So the thing that's missing for many organizations is that route. Now, why are we talking about having a wellbeing strategy? Well, it's actually because of the additional impact that it has on organizations' approach to wellbeing. What we're looking at here is data from the CIPD from their report in 2022. There is a more recent report in 2023, but the way that the data is presented in 2022, I think, is more valuable here. And it shows, if you look along the key along the bottom, you can see that the turquoise green data is organizations that say they have a standalone wellbeing strategy in place. And then the data in the kind of light pink shows this is organizations that don't have a standalone wellbeing strategy in place, and they're more kind of ad hoc with their wellbeing approach. And then you can see that the percentage of positive impacts in relation to each of these interventions, or each of these impacts rather, that are seen within this organization. So if we start with better work-life balance, you can see that 43% of organizations surveyed say that they've seen a better work-life balance as a result of them having a wellbeing strategy in place, whereas only 19% of the organizations that don't have a wellbeing strategy in place saw benefits in work-life balance. So naturally, if you introduce wellbeing provision and you see an improvement in better work-life balance, that's a good thing. But it's even more successful when you have a strategy in place versus just taking an ad hoc approach and focusing on the tertiary. Let's take some other data points. We'll have a look at lower sickness absence. So you can see that 25% of organizations have said that improved as a result of their wellbeing activities. And again, that's higher than the 12% that was seen in the organizations that don't have a standalone strategy in place. And then maybe if we come towards the bottom, you can see that there's improved productivity, 27% improved productivity for organizations that have a strategy in place versus only 5% in organizations that don't have a strategy but are still doing things for the benefit of their organization. Now, what we can see here, the story that's telling us, is that when there is a dedicated wellbeing strategy that is actually followed, that you see a better outcome in all the areas that most organizations would want to see improvements in, which ultimately reduce the amount of spend that organizations are putting into their wellbeing budget. So having a strategy is part of success. And so if having a strategy is part of success, what are some of the obstacles that we see when we're supporting organizations right from the very beginning? Well, one of the things that we see as being an area that could be improved is not doing an initial needs analysis, where an organization might have something like an employee assistance program in place, or they might have access to physiotherapy to address musculoskeletal issues. They might have access to maybe discounts with gym membership, or they might have speakers on certain topics that are particularly popular at the moment in the wellbeing industry. And they're providing those things to their employees because there is definitely benefit to those things, but they haven't established whether or not there's a need for that within the organization. And so providing a benefit that isn't necessarily in line with the need of the organization is an obstacle to success. Another thing that we see that we tend to help organizations with is there being not just a lack of data, but a lack of understanding which data to utilize to be able to then develop their wellbeing strategy in the first place. Another failing that we see that is most certainly an obstacle to success with any kind of wellbeing plan is the concept of engagement and effective communication to the end users. There's a big difference between broadcasting information about wellbeing benefits versus actually helping the end user to understand how will that benefit me and when should I utilize it. And then another obstacle that we see is not actually assessing the effectiveness of things that have been done in the past. So again, organizations that have provided a huge amount of spend and resources to support on the well-being of their workforce, but they're not actually assessing the attendance rates to those things or the satisfaction rates of those things, or whether or not it actually helped them to achieve their mission, vision statement, and objectives. And so they're not circling back, then means they're missing an opportunity to be able to develop the next iteration of this strategy. And of course, it's not a strategy unless you're considering the obstacles that you are likely to face. It's just a plan. So if we move on to the next slide, before I hand back over to Joe. And so within the Workplace Wellbeing Programme, there are 10 kind of key steps. It's a running theme throughout the entire programme over the 3-year period, as a minimum, really, that we encourage organisations to subscribe. And the 10 steps on screen, you can see that step 1 is actually just understanding what are the optimal steps for a successful and sustainable health and wellbeing programme or strategy. And so the materials that we provide as part of the programme, as you'll see as we go through the presentation, are designed to fulfil that particular function. Moving across to step 2 is actually having a look at what are our current activities, what are we doing at the moment within our organisation, and what have we done in the past, and what data do we have available to us to know whether or not what we're doing or what we've done before has actually been effective. Once you've gone through that data capture and analysis, which again, as I mentioned before, there are tools that we provide as part of this programme to support that, you then move on to step 3 of evaluating what your gaps are and start to develop your current strategy. And it could be that you have a documented strategy at the moment and you identify within your data analysis that there are current gaps. Moving into step 4, of course, we're talking here about developing a wellbeing strategy. So at some point, you need to turn all of that learning, data analysis, and reviewing gaps into a documented strategy and plan. Before then, you actually present this information to the leadership within the organisation in order to gain their commitment and ensure that they have the right levels of competence to be able to support the messages. Once the leaders are fully engaged with the documented strategy and plan, moving into then actually implementing and rolling out the measures. And then moving into step 7, which I've referred to as one of the potential obstacles, there needs to be constant, regular engagement and making sure that there's actually effective communication from what the plan is to what the end user actually is experiencing. One of the common failures that we see within any kind of wellbeing plan or wellbeing strategy is that something exists on paper, but employees don't fully understand or know about it. And so technically it doesn't exist to the employees, even if it could be classed as an award-winning wellbeing strategy or plan. So, of course, moving into step 8, it's not something that can just be launched and left alone. It is something that requires constant effort and, constant effort really from the people that are running the show. To then be able to come around full circle to assess in step 9 whether or not what you've rolled out in your implemented measures, whether or not they've actually helped you achieve your objectives, your mission statement, and your vision that you set out right at the very beginning. And then moving into step 10, one of the things that we absolutely encourage whenever doing a review of a wellbeing strategy is not just determining what worked and what didn't work, but it's also sharing when something did work with either the internal stakeholders or externally. Something that we need more so within the wellbeing industry is organizations sharing case studies of where they found success. And that is something that we try to do through our Keep Thriving campaign. So I'll now hand back over to Joe.
Thanks, Marcus. So Marcus has outlined some brilliant points about when we need a wellbeing strategy and some of the core elements of it. How can we help then? So the Workplace Wellbeing Programme, which is what we're here to talk about today, is supporting organisations just like yours move from a situation of feeling lost, feeling overwhelmed and stuck, to a place where you have a clear plan, a starting point, an end point, a clear route to get there, and some pieces mitigated along the way as well, so that you can better support your employees with their health and well-being, so that you can have decreased sickness absence and increased productivity, as we've seen in the data already. And of course, improved profits. That would be nice too. And that's all without having thousands stored away to spend on wellbeing initiatives, without having a dedicated wellbeing lead, although if you do have them, keep them, or without having to put yoga classes on every other day. Well, how do we do that? Well, we have a few fundamental components of the Workplace Wellbeing Programme that helps organisations up and down the country with that. So the first one is an organisation assessment tool, an employee wellbeing survey, comparison report, written and video guidance on strategy creation, a dedicated wellbeing support manager with the supported and premium tiers, and a dedicated online module. So I'm going to go through a few of those in a little bit more detail. If I was to go through all of them, we might be here for another 3 days, and I know your time is precious, so we'll just go through top 3 or 4. So as Marcus has already highlighted, one of the most important aspects of putting any wellbeing provision in place is knowing what your organisation's current situation is and what's needed to improve it. So our organisation assessment tool covers the domains of wellbeing that we talked about at the very beginning, uses the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, and it also allows you to undertake a thorough assessment with over 100 questions of your health, safety and wellbeing provision. It draws on existing and recognised and evidence frameworks from within health and safety, which we've done for a very long time, and human resources fields. So the organisation assessment tool is intended to enable your organisation to self-assess against a series of key measures in relation to the management of health, safety and wellbeing within your organisation, and then use that as a baseline to measure the impact of your wellbeing strategies and interventions year on year. It allows you to identify gaps in your current approach to help map out a measurable plan of action towards best practice, so that you can continue to move along the continuum to ensure that you are always moving forward and never falling behind what your employees need. And then finally, it helps to inform your decisions on the most suitable employee interventions for your organisation, crucially focusing on prevention rather than cure. So what happens with our organisations is that they complete the assessment, and then we provide a report containing detailed and prioritised recommendations to help you structure your wellbeing strategy in a holistic and integrated way. Then we have our employee wellbeing survey. And this gives you anonymous insights into what your people think you're doing well as an organisation and areas for improvement. So it provides you with your employees' perspective of how well you are doing to improve their health, safety and well-being. It asks your employees questions about their well-being, levels of activity, smoking, eating and drinking habits, and it helps you to build a really good picture of the health and well-being of your staff. What do you think? Are your employees more stressed than the average in the UK? Are your employees active enough? Our employee wellbeing survey allows you to compare your employee data against UK benchmarks and other British Safety Council customers. And then the 3-year programme gives you the opportunity to compare results year on year so that you can measure the effectiveness of your efforts. In addition to the benchmark comparisons, so comparing yourself against UK averages and British Safety Council customers, our employee wellbeing survey is designed to work specifically with the organisation assessment tool so that you can measure your performance directly against each other. So, for example, you might think as a senior leadership team that you promote a really good culture of mental health and wellbeing, and then you might find out from your employees that only 24% of people think that you do. Or maybe you think you have a really good handle on staff working outside of their contracted hours, and then you find out from the survey that 80% of your staff are working outside of hours. So having these two assessments side by side saves you spending hours trawling through data and trying to compare what's going on with reality. That means that you can determine the best use of your resources because you can see if there are any gaps in perceptions. So instead, you're able to have a really clear picture of your people's needs so you can match it with a suitable solution. We also have on-demand guidance. So you're able to access our resources however you want, whenever you want, and there's an array of materials and mediums. We've got video and written guidance, checklists, templates to follow. And we have the steps to enable you to write and implement a wellbeing strategy, including how and what data to collect, how to write, launch and implement your strategy, and then how to use data to review and monitor your strategy. So what enables you to do is take your organisation from A to E, where E stands for excellent. And I'm going to hand over to Marcus now, and he's going to go through some of the additional benefits of the Workplace Wellbeing Programme.
Great, thank you, Jo. So naturally, what Jo's already gone through are some of probably the most core and most important elements of the Workplace Wellbeing Programme, helping to get that data capture, understanding what the employee need is, comparing it to what the perceptions are of the organisation, producing the gap analysis, and then, of course, developing the wellbeing strategy off the back of what the specific need is. So these additional benefits are really kind of more supportive materials, but there are things in here that we have found to be beneficial for our existing supporters. One of the things is employee comms materials. So I mentioned before that there's a difference between broadcasting information and then truly communicating it to the end user. So we already have templates that pre-exist so that they can be utilised as part of the rollout of wellbeing strategy. Also, supporters are invited to and actually help to form the main topics that we discussed for some exclusive roundtable events that we've hosted previously and will continue to do. In addition to that, there are some pre-existing guides for both employee and employer use on specific wellbeing topics, guides and fact sheets that can be used, again, as part of the communication of the wellbeing strategy. We also have access to our Start the Conversation training materials, which is actually one of our kind of very well accessed courses as part of our training offering. And it's helping individuals understand how to start having a conversation about mental health within the workplace. And of course, having some template materials on HR policies, again, not to be used by themselves, but to be bespoke for the specific company need. And then in addition to that, having access to the Corona Navigate Safety Lite, which is, again, further tools and resources more geared towards health and safety. But of course, as we've already highlighted previously, physical safety is one of the subsections of the domains of wellbeing. And then lastly, again, just to support the kind of internal branding of wellbeing strategy, we have certificates, logos, and email footers that can be used along the way. Now, the way that we've kind of packaged up our Workplace Wellbeing Programme is in a 3-tiered approach. And it varies, of course, depending on the level of budget available and also the need from the organisation. So we have the independent, the supported, and the premium tier. And as you can see from the kind of comparison chart on the right-hand side, that there are, of course, similarities between independent, supported, and premium. So all of them do include the digital guidance module, which can be accessed at your own pace and actually take you through each of those 10 steps that I've referred to earlier. Each one of the tiers has access to the organisation assessment tool that Jo's gone through, as well as the employee wellbeing survey in its kind of off-shelf format. All of them have access to the guides and the additional benefits that I just referred to, as well as the template for communication purposes. And then also all 3 tiers, independent, supported, and premium, include that gap analysis report between the organisation assessment tool and the employee wellbeing survey. The difference then is where we start to see between the independent and supported, where the supported includes access to a dedicated support manager that is there for conference calls, questions, and support throughout the term of the subscription, and also being able to review draft wellbeing strategies to provide guidance on where there might be room for improvement based on, of course, the experience of the support manager and helping other organisations. Then moving up from the supported tier into the premium tier, of course, with the premium tier, there's the same access that you have to supported, but it also includes more of a bespoke experience where edits can be made to the employee wellbeing survey, It can actually be broken down. The data analysis with the survey can be broken down into more specific data sets and demographics for comparison. And also there are additional days of completely bespoke and open needed wellbeing consultancy that can be used throughout the term of the agreement as well. And those wellbeing consultancy days, they could be delivering focus groups, they could be doing further data analysis, they could be providing actually bespoke training depending on the needs of the data analysis that's being completed. So they're always completely dependent on needs of the organizations that we support. And of course, we're talking here about a strategy. We're talking about something that isn't easy to just put together overnight and then roll out. And then all of a sudden we start to see all of the benefits that we've already reported on that a wellbeing strategy can produce. What we're talking about is a long-term project, something that needs to evolve over time, something that ideally moves us from that tertiary approach to the primary approach, where we increase our understanding and maturity with workplace wellbeing. This isn't something that is either once it's rolled out, it's left alone and it doesn't need to be iterated again in the future. The best wellbeing strategy is the one that evolves with the evolving, changing need within an organization. And of course, we've been delivering now this Workplace Wellbeing Programme for a few years. And so we already have some existing supporters that are going through the process and have gone through the process and have been willing enough to share their experiences with us. So I won't read out all of these, but I'm just going to read out the top one here. Something to focus on if we've got HR directors, finance directors, and managing directors all providing positive feedback on this, some of which tend to be the stakeholders that provide resistance to introducing wellbeing change in an organization. And so let's take the top one here. We've got the Workplace Wellbeing Programme has helped us draft a wellbeing strategy and supported us in rolling out various associated wellbeing initiatives. The support managers really know what they're talking about and give practical guidance. Wellbeing in our workplace has much improved thanks to the Workplace Wellbeing Programme, and it's well worth the time and financial investment. And so obviously we've put a lot of time and effort putting these resources together in order to help organizations develop and enhance their wellbeing strategies in the future. And so before we move into the Q&A and we can have a look at what questions have been submitted, what we would like to do is invite everybody to provide feedback for their experience of attending the webinar today. So to do that, again, just please scan the QR code. And then if you could just provide your thoughts, your ratings, and have a look at the other questions. It will take about 2 minutes to complete. And if you scan that now and start to do it and complete it after the webinar, we will be eternally grateful. And of course, if you don't already follow us, we do have social media channels that you can follow us on, which we regularly post on. And also, because you've attended today's webinar, looking at what the Workplace Wellbeing Programme actually is, you can also scan this final QR code, where you could actually book in for a free consultation with one of our wellbeing team to understand whether or not there are things that we could actually do to support you and your organisation with your wellbeing objectives, whether that be through the Workplace Wellbeing Programme or the other wellbeing solutions that we provide to other organisations. So again, feel free to scan that and complete. And then also you can see at the very bottom, there is email addresses and telephone numbers. You can also reach out to us via those. Okay, so I think now can start to have a look at the Q&As. So Jo, do we have anything submitted?
We do, thanks Marcus. So the first question that we have submitted, which is from Lisa, and she's asked, how can a wellbeing strategy help with so many metrics that you shared from the CIPD report? Sickness, productivity, morale, how could it help with so many of them?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. First thing I would actually encourage is trying not to look to improve all of those metrics. The first thing that I would look at is what's the specific need within that organisation at that time. And it may well be that sickness absence is the priority at the moment. It might be that many individuals are spending a lot of time away from work because of sickness, and that becomes a key metric to look to improve. Or it could be that productivity might be a key area of focus with the changing working landscape, people working from home, people working from offices. That might be a primary area that requires focus. So I wouldn't look to try and have a wellbeing strategy that improves all of those key areas, unless they are areas that have been found in your prior data analysis. But one of the key points that I made earlier on was it almost, to a certain extent, doesn't matter what you're trying to achieve with your wellbeing objectives. If you have a strategy, if you actually develop a strategy based on the principles that we've shared already, you're more likely to find success across all of those metrics versus just trying to roll out some tertiary interventions with the hope that they might see some benefit. They may well see some benefit, but you'll see more beneficial outcomes if you have a strategy in place.
Thanks, Marcus. It's not necessarily about trying to do it all at once. It's about finding out what your employees need and then starting from there. One of the questions that we've had is, can you please explain step 8? I want a little bit more information on that. And step 8 of the 10 steps to a successful wellbeing strategy, step 8 was sustainability. Are you able to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so sustainability is trying not to bite off more than you can chew. Linking into the previous question, if we were to decide that, or if we were to be in a position where we have an unlimited wellbeing budget, we can spend whatever time, resources, and energy that we need on improving the wellbeing of our workers. And we decided to roll out some specific benefits that are directly linked to the need of the organization. And we have a very significant, very well thought out communication plan. And it's something that forms the primary focus of everything that we do as an organization. The chances are you won't be able to achieve every single metric that you're hoping to achieve. In the same way that you as an individual, we're coming up to the end of the year, so I'm sure there'll be some New Year's resolutions coming up in conversation without much further delay. And if we wanted to improve our health, and we decided to start exercising and start eating healthy and quit smoking and stop drinking alcohol, having a better social life, if we try to do all those things at the same time, the chances of us being successful are reduced. So sustainability is a combination of making sure you keep the engagement going with whatever the wellbeing strategy and plan is, but also being very decisive about, let's focus on the things that the organization needs right now, not what is fashionable at the moment, whatever the latest topics are that are popping up in the media.
Thanks, Marcus. I think we've got time for one more quick question, and if you're all right with that, I will answer it quickly. It's in which languages is the material available? The primary material, so the online on-demand resources, are all in English only at the moment. We've had a few supporters over the years wanting the Employee Wellbeing Survey translated into other languages, like Danish, Polish, Turkish, which we do sort of on demand as and when they're needed by employees of those businesses. And I think we have sort of about 30 seconds left, so I think it's a good place to wrap up. So thank you so much for attending our webinar this afternoon. We hope you've gained a lot from it, and if you could fill in the feedback using the QR code earlier, or you'll get an email in the next couple of hours. If you fill in the feedback, that'd be really helpful, as it'll help us we're starting to plan for our next year's webinars. It'll really help us to plan for next year so we can provide what you would like. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, everyone.